Hi, this is Carla. Welcome back to the Dragon Energy course. I am excited to share this information with you today because it is a brand new module that I'm adding today, November 1st, 2024. And I will pause real quickly to share that if you would like to receive this module as a live class, I am holding a workshop on November 11 during the 11/11 portal. So it's a 2-hour workshop where I will share this information and give you an activation live. This recorded version will also include a recorded activation, but if you would like to come to the class live, um, check my website or my Instagram. I think it's on my Instagram to sign up for that. But anyway, um, welcome back, and I'm excited to share this new information with you. If you are new to me, if you've taken the previous modules, then you already know my background. I will share that since then I've hosted a couple of dragon retreats by now. The first one was a Dragon Forest retreat in 2023, last year. And then this year, last July, during the 7/7 Sirius Gateway portal, I held a Cosmic Dragons retreat. So, if you are part of my dragon community, you'll hear about next year's events and retreats. And I've also, more than likely, this was not around if you were one of my earlier dragon students. My dragon mystery school has now expanded, so I have other programs, offerings, many ways to co-create, and I'll share more about that at the end of this presentation. So let us jump right into it. I will also just preface that this new information that I'm sharing has come about because I have met a few different dragons now. I've been meeting different ones over the years, but these ones that I'm going to talk about today in this module are sort of a different group that is of I would say, a higher, a more elevated frequency. And it's been clear as I've met each one of them over different spaces, sometimes in my programs, my classes, sometimes in readings. So in the many different ways that I've met these particular dragons, it's been clear that their frequency is different. And that they are now able to essentially pierce through our veils and come forward and assist us because of the rising frequency in the collective consciousness. So, in that sense, their frequency certainly is different than the ones that I've met before, and probably many of whom you've already met either through my programs, my classes, this course, or on your own. Um, but it will also be interesting to see if any of these new dragons that I talk about today are those that have already been coming into your field. So the first dragon that I'd like to talk about in this module is actually one that I've mentioned earlier in the course. However, I'm bringing forward once again the alchemy dragon to because I've learned more about this dragon and worked with this dragon quite a few times since I first talked about it. And also, there's information that is relevant to you and information that would be helpful to you if you choose to work with this dragon. So, just a little recap on the alchemy dragon, who is such a unique looking dragon. I mean, he's got his body is like a green black color, and he has fluorescent green eyes and breathes fluorescent green flame, just like this image. When I met this dragon, he is a ninth dimensional dragon that I first met on a flight back from the East Coast back in 2022. And when I first met him, I first saw these two glowing green eyes staring at me. And then slowly his face came into view. I've learned since then that when I meet some of these dragons that are kind of unusual looking, oftentimes they don't show themselves fully to me. I have a feeling they try to sense first whether or not I'm open or receptive to meeting them, if I'm not freaked out. And then when they sense that I'm good with it, then they show me the rest of themselves. And so that's been an interesting experience on my part. Some of you may be able to relate to that. But after I met him on that flight, the very next day, I stumbled on an Instagram post from an artist, and it was an image of a dragon rider on a dragon that looked so much like my image, my vision of the alchemy dragon. Green black color, fluorescent green eyes, and flame. And so I was referring to that image for a while until I started playing with Midjourney and generating more images to illustrate my many visions. Um, so a few weeks after I met this dragon, I did end up channeling him. And when he came forward, he explained that he carried the energies of alchemy, and that's why I ended up calling him the Alchemy Dragon. He showed up as a teacher and a guide for me. The way he explained it was that he was stepping forward as one of my guides to teach me specifically um, uh, not so much teach, but like really helping remember how to work with matter, how to work on alchemizing the structure of matter, of material, in order to better serve me on my path. And I recall him saying that I will be able to teach this to others, but first I needed to remember myself how to do it. So it's interesting because it's just like anything else. It's like we have to reclaim those memories, those cellular memories, those abilities from past lifetimes, parallel lives, and all that, and reawaken that in ourselves in order to um, help others do that as well if that is your path. So anyway, um, sure enough, in one of my Dragon Consciousness Program Level 1 classes, he was one of two dragons that showed up in sort of like an instructional exercise in class. We were working with crystals, so they were to both they both. I won't go into all the details of that, but that's it was one of the exercises where we were specifically working with crystals. So he and the magma dragon, whom I'll introduce you to next, were both working with us so that we could learn to change the properties of the crystal or crystals that we were working with, and or change our perception of those crystals properties. So that was actually a very interesting uh, class. But that aside, when it comes to working with the alchemy dragon, I've worked with this dragon in many different ways. He's even shown up in my healing sessions, like in person, Reiki sessions, many of my journeys. Some of you may have been in some of my journeys working specifically with the alchemy dragon, but oftentimes when he comes forward or when I work with him, it's really to for him to assist in transmuting and alchemizing dense energies in our field or even within our physical bodies with his green flame. One of the more interesting ways that I've seen him do this is he would breathe these orbs of green flame, very much like this image right here. Uh, and those green orbs of flame work like it's almost like a magnet. If you imagine a magnet and then a magnet attracting, magnetizing iron shards. Do you know how it pulls these iron shards so quickly to the magnet? It's like just it just grabs onto that. That's how I've seen him work with these green orbs of flame. He will breathe that into a person's field, sometimes into the crown. I've seen it work with when I was helping somebody release some dense energies within their field. I saw these green orbs of flame enter the crown and then just, or almost like scan the body, and then it was grabbing all these dense energies on its way down. So that's one of the ways that you can work with him. I also wanted to share this message that I channeled from him to just reinforce that he has explained that we can, work with this energy. It's a tool that we can wield ourselves. Um, and we may doubt that we have that ability, that we can do that, but it's simply because we haven't remembered our true powers as fractals of source consciousness. So I really wanted to share that to reinforce that. You can read this at your convenience. I won't read it verbatim. There's another part of this that I also shared in my Instagram post because that's just an excerpt, but um, it's a very, I would say, reassuring message. So I really encourage you to work with the Alchemy Dragon if you are guided to. So the next one that I just briefly mentioned earlier is the Magma Dragon. This is an interesting dragon. I actually love the Magma Dragon. And my how this relationship, this connection unfolded is really quite interesting. What happened is that I woke up one morning at 4 a.m. I was tired. I had two almost back-to-back sessions the previous day that really wiped me out, and it left me I was nauseated. I went to bed that night feeling like I was getting sick, but I knew it was energetic, it wasn't something physical. So I woke up at 4 a.m. and I ended up chatting on DM with my good friend, who many of you might know, Abueng. She's also one of my Dragon students. And she offered to send me energy to help me get through the day. And I said, yeah, sure, I'd love that. Because I can go back to sleep, but I was exhausted. And in that session, it was interesting because she said 5 dragons showed up for me. It was 5 dragons plus her own dragon. But as she was sending me energy, remote healing, these 5 dragons showed up that she hadn't met before. They practically took over the session, according to her. Now, one of them was the Magma Dragon. And the interesting thing about that is I had not met this dragon personally yet, but that in one of those sessions the previous day that wiped me out, I happened to be working for the first time with this sort of like molten magma like energy. It looked to me during the session like blown glass when it's super hot. Um, so when Abueng sent me that healing and these dragons came forward, the Magma Dragon explained that I was a conduit for a greater amount of energy than I was used to at the time. So my system needed to adjust, and that's why this dragon was coming forward and basically helping me to um, handle those new frequencies. So the Magma Dragon and the other dragons that showed up in that session were there to work with me in different ways. They did different sort. I won't go into the details because I don't remember everything. I have to look back through what I wrote down, but they basically helped me in different ways to handle the new frequencies that I was drawing from the core and help me increase the flow of those energies. So I've shared on this slide their signature specialty. What the Magma Dragon does is they help ground us, just like how electricity needs to be grounded. So when we connect to larger energy sources, the Magma Dragon helps us so that we can handle that increase in flow of energy and information as we expand. And as I mentioned earlier, with the Alchemy Dragon, this dragon, the Magma Dragon, has shown up in my classes as well. Not just with the Alchemy Dragon, but in some of my other Dragon Consciousness classes, this dragon has come forward. This is an excerpt of a message from the Magma Dragon that I find very fascinating. Abueng channeled this that time when I think it was a week after she sent me that remote healing. I connected with Abueng, and this dragon came forward again in a channeling. I actually had a question during that reading about a some higher frequency, or no, okay, my question was, I had a concern about those higher frequencies that I was accessing because I was worried about the effect of these higher frequencies on those receiving it, and whether I needed to do anything differently. Um, because I've had many people let me know that during my journey, some of them go very deep. So there's just that, that teacher part of me that's a little concerned about whether it's too much and if there's something I needed to do to regulate things. So this is an excerpt of the message he shared that I feel is very helpful, and also relevant to you as you continue to work with energies, whether or not you're a healer, or do energy work, even if it's just working on yourselves. It's important to know. I feel that this message is very relevant and helpful. So essentially, he was saying that the reason they work to up level us instead of them coming down into our frequency is because we're already in human form. So our human form is already connecting us and to that collective consciousness. We can't be a part of it, away from it. We cannot be separate from it. So even if our frequency rises, our energy rises, um, it's not going to be at a point where it's not accessible for people because for other humans because they're already connected to it. So we're encoded in ways that we may not fully understand in our human minds, but there are codes in not only our body and our DNA, but even like the air around us, the food, everything around us. And that is part of why, we're constantly taking in that energy um, around us and from Gaia. So that connection is what allows us to be able to receive these frequencies. All right. Um, this is one thing about recording the sessions is I typically like to pause for questions. So I don't get the luxury of that. And it's also, I'm just talking to a screen, but I encourage you to come to the live workshop. I'll try to do more live classes for the course. Most of my classes these days are with my program, which go very deep. And um, there's a lot of co-creation that happens in those. But anyway, so let's move on. The next one I'd like to talk about is also in relation to that exercise where the magma dragon and the alchemy dragon were working with us with crystals. So during that exercise, there was a part where we were going through that, working with the crystals, and then I suddenly saw these tiny crystal youngling dragons. They were like youngling dragons, but they were smaller than that. They were tiny. And they specifically work with crystals. They worked with the crystals that we were holding, all of us in our different, rooms, because this is a class on Zoom. They were able to, I saw them able to pierce into the crystals, like go into the very center of the crystals, and they were changing the properties of the crystals. And how they explained it also is that they were doing that with the agreement of the crystal itself. So essentially, it was like a mutual understanding between them and the crystal that we chose to work with in that class. And they also remind me that from a different lens, we could also look at it in a way, from the perspective that that crystal or those different crystals that we were working with chose to work with each of us at that particular moment. So it's interesting to see them do that because I did see them pierce into the center of the crystal and they were like working in there. Uh, let's see. Basically, when they were doing that during that exercise, they were asking, us to reflect on if the crystal looked different, if it felt different, if it changed the way we were called to work with the crystal, maybe in different ways than we have previously. So I would actually, just dropping in, I would suggest that you play with it. If you work with crystals, some of you might even channel crystals. Call in these tiny crystal dragons and maybe visualize them going into a crystal that you're holding and be intentional about that work, and then intentional about how you'd like that, how you'd like to work with that crystal. And as I said, just like how they have a mutual agreement with the crystal when they work with it, I feel that that's should be the relationship also that we have with our crystals when we work with them. Like anything else, it's all intentional and coming from that place of pure intention and pure heart. So let's see. Um, what else do I want to share? One of the other things I want to share about that particular exercise, when the dragons were working with us, they had us work with a ball of energy in our hands, and like an orb. And the magma dragon and the alchemy dragon breathed their energies into that orb that we were holding in our hands. And it changed the center of the orb. That's where those tiny crystal younglings were formed. So we were visualizing this orb, the magma dragon and the alchemy dragon were working on it. And then in the center of that orb, these tiny crystal youngling dragons were formed. And that's when they started working with us. So it's interesting how they came forward. It's almost like we birthed them or co-created them with the alchemy and the magma dragon. Let's see. I want to read. This is not on, yeah, this is not on the slide, but let me just read this message from them really quickly. They said, "Dear souls, this is our gift of remembrance. This is our gift of recollection as you awaken within your very being the consciousness that has been there all along. And perhaps you see this image in the very center of the core of energy as a tiny speck, perhaps growing a little bigger. That is to illustrate how it is often very deep within one's consciousness that this dragon frequency is often buried underneath one's consciousness. But we call your attention to this to remind you that it has and always will be in the center of your being. You can draw it forward into your awareness as you embody more of this frequency that resides within you. And it's not simply our energies that we infuse into your fields, for it's a unique frequency that you create in combination with your many guides. And that's what we wish for you to acknowledge as the frequency that you carry within yourselves." Yeah, so I encourage you to work with your crystals, call in these dragons, and share what your experiences are. I'd love to hear from you about that. All right, the next dragon is the Void Dragon. I actually, unlike the Alchemy Dragon, where there's one specific Alchemy Dragon that I work with, the Void Dragon, I've seen more than one of them that that show up in classes, journeys. So I tend to think there's quite a few of them. This dragon came forward during my reading in response to a reading I received in response to a question I had concerning a recent connection with an ancient Egyptian deity. Um, I had some doubts, some questions about that, and this dragon came forward to explain uh, uh, what I was, how I brought that dragon forward, or sorry, that Egyptian deity forward, and reassure me and really explain how that connection was made and how I can continue to make that connection. Also reassuring me that yes, I was able to bring this Egyptian guide through. Um, so the other thing I'll share about the Void Dragon, one of the reasons I love working with them is I've been working with, it's so aligned with how I've been experiencing the void since I was very, very young. When I was between, I would say, 3 and 5 years old, I used to have all these existential questions running through my mind. More than likely, it's because I experienced, death in family members, very early in my life. So I would have all these questions running in my mind, and then I'd find myself in this space of nothingness, and which I eventually learned was the void. Um, And the interesting thing about finding myself in the void is that it always felt like I could reach for the answers that I was seeking in relation to my questions. Like I was so close to grasping the answers, but then it would slip away. So that was a very frustrating experience very young in my life. And then when I was older, I learned to work with the void. And what I would do is I would deliberately place myself there in that space when I would meditate. And then later on, when I would bring through vocal channeling, besides just visions, I would also place myself in this space. So when this void dragon came through for the first time in a reading, they said that they were the void dragons, not just one of them, were aware of this, of how I would work with the void, and they said that they were aware of this and they could see me. It's basically like if you imagine being in the void, like I lit up for them more than other humans who were constantly coming to their little corner of the universe because I had been working and going to the void quite a bit. So they came to help me. And how they help is they help you stay in the frequency of the void, that 0 point neutrality. Um, I also still see or often see like the cosmos like void almost as soon as my eyes close when I'm very relaxed or when I'm dozing off. It happens almost every day. Like if I just like close my eyes, if I'm so relaxed, I'm in that maybe falling into theta state. Um, Oftentimes, I could be watching TV and I doze off, like with my husband or whoever, and I start to doze off, and suddenly I'll see that void, the cosmos, like, and the stars like are rushing at me, and usually that jolts me awake. So the void dragons, their specialty is helping us stay in that frequency. So whether we're channeling, we're just meditating, um, any of those instances where it helps us to stay in the void, they can help us maintain that frequency. They can also help us maintain sort of like a calm and still state when we're receiving the information that we ask for. Some of you may relate to this, that sometimes when we bring forward messages or receive visions, we get a little excited, and then it sometimes that throws off the connection or we lose it, which can be frustrating. So that's another way that they can help, is sort of helping maintain the calmness and stillness to help us be receptive to receiving that information. One of the more recent ways that I've worked with the Void Dragons is in one of my Dragon Wisdom Circle classes, where I teach. It's sort of like a channeling and bringing forward the wisdom from the dragons is what that program is about. So the Void Dragons came forward to support each of the students who were learning to bring their frequency, their messages, their energy forward. So they're very helpful. I love the Void Dragons. These are some key messages that I feel are relevant also for you to know in regard to the void. So I love these messages from the Void Dragons. They said that I've actually bolded the last message as a very key um, snippet. The void is not nothing. The void is everything before it is everything. So, one of my favorite messages from them. All right. Before I move on, one last thing. They advised me also to place myself in the void, in there before sessions. That's a good idea because it will help me see the guides around me. So give it a try, whether or not you do healing sessions, even if it's just meditating. Place yourself in the void and get into that frequency. Call them in if you want to, so that we can better connect. You can better connect with the guides around you that you work with. All right, moving on. The next one is the slate dragon. This is a dragon that I also met in one of my classes. It was in the closing ceremony of my level 1 program in April of 2024. we were working with elemental dragons and guides in that program. And when I first connected with this dragon, what I saw was just gray energy. I saw a lot of gray energy. And then I saw a gray dragon. Now, that was the first time that I saw a gray dragon. It's my first time seeing a gray dragon. It wasn't like a dull gray, but more really a lot like this color. It was darker, like dark like slate. At first I was thinking granite, and then they said no, slate. And that's why I ended up calling him the slate dragon. And when he identified himself, he said he was from Inner Earth. He's from Inner Earth, and he's connected to the ancient cultures within Inner Earth. It was interesting because it was a different dragon signature than I was used to at the time when I first channeled him, and even the light language sounded different. And I had to actually calibrate to his frequency through that new light language before I could bring his message through. And when I did, he explained that he's connected to the ancient cultures that have ascended into 5D, that are in the inner earth, but we don't yet see them. He's he's basically of their energies, and he's here to assist us to prepare as more of those inner earth energies come up to the surface. And at the time, he said, we needed to calibrate more as a collective. And he said more to come when that time is a match of frequencies. Um, the interesting part also about how he works is it and can work with us, especially if you're a grid worker. When we do grid work with Gaia, we can call on the Slate Dragon to assist from the inner earth portion of Gaia's field so that what we do on the surface, he can align within her core. Because basically, he was saying that the work he does in inner earth is preparing and activating Gaia's 5D grid. So when this came forward, it was almost like I think I had a vision of like the surface work happening and then the inner earth happening, and him helping connect the two, so that there's synergy there, and it's like a bridging also of what's happening from the 5D, from the fifth dimension into ours as we move into the fifth dimensional frequency. So definitely work with him if you are a grid worker, if you feel called to work with him. Um, I found that the work that he's doing in that Gaia's 5D grid is so, so important. All right, this next one, this is probably, no, not the newest. I was trying to think if this is the latest group of dragons that I've met. Maybe not, but one of the newer ones, certainly. These dragons I call the atmospheric dragons. That's what dropped in during the journey. They showed up in one of my level 1 classes, but the more recent ones. This was just last month, October, early October. And what they did is they showed up. We were working on the water module, um, of the program, and they dropped in as I was calibrating our space in the beginning of the class. So when I start my programs, and just like I did in this energy course, I calibrate the space before we get into the content, not the long journey, but just like calibrating the space. So I was just calibrating our space, and they dropped in right away. Pardon me. And they identify themselves as atmospheric dragons. And I suppose there's water in atmosphere, so that makes sense. Um, I was calibrating the space. They flew down from my top right, which is where I often see higher frequency dragons come in. Um, and what they were doing is they explained that when we calibrate to the frequency of the dragons, they in turn are stepping down their frequency to some degree in order for us to be able to connect with them. And that's been my experience from the very first time I helped connect somebody to their guardian dragon. Because when they're high frequency, I do see them coming down from the top right, and then us raising our frequency, and we essentially meet halfway to connect with them. Let's see. They also said Oh, one of the other things I just to explain how I see them, I've written it down here. They're, I think that this rendering is very close to how I see them, but they're even more transparent than this. It was actually really hard to see them. They were skinny, just like this, but like in this image, they look more solid here, but in my vision, they were very, very ethereal looking, light blue, almost the color of the sky. So much so that it was kind of hard to see them against the sky because it was almost like they blended in. So I just wanted to share that visual of how I perceived them. They reminded us that when we work with the different dragons, we must match their frequency so that meeting halfway, they can help us calibrate to that so that the guidance and messages, the activations can come through, basically clearing the pathway for that to come through. As far as their energetic signature, just like how they look so ethereal, they even felt weightless to me, like very soft and weightless. I guess just like the atmosphere. Very interesting. Okay, so let's see. All right, I will move on. I want to talk about the Christ consciousness dragons next. A group of dragons that I also have mentioned earlier in the course, but I have more information to share, and also because they are coming forward a lot more frequently. So, um, when I first met them 4 years ago, it was during, like I've shared, a reading that I was doing for somebody who's very connected to Yeshua. So for a while there, when the Yeshua and the Christ consciousness dragons would come into my field together, always like this, where he's in the middle, and all these Christ consciousness dragons had their heads bowed. It was a very moving scene the very first time I met them. They're also very different. Their energetic signature is so distinct that I can't even like articulate in words. It's more of a feeling, and I'm sure those of you who connect with your guides, you know that this is really how we connect with them. It's an energetic connection more than an intellectual kind of understanding. So, but what's tied to them is this very deep, permeating sense of unconditional love and compassion. And when I do connect with them, it's really mainly telepathically and through feeling. I don't even know, I guess I have since channeled messages from them, but much of it happens in like telepathically and through feeling. But what's evolved since I first met them is where I only used to see them when it was in connection with somebody who felt very connected with Yeshua. They started coming forward more often. They would join my classes, my journeys. They were even showing up in like in-person sessions with people who didn't necessarily feel like this strong connection with Yeshua, and it became clear to me that they were coming forward more and more. Again, with the rising consciousness, and also to assist us as Christ consciousness becomes anchored um, in our dimension and on Earth. These dragons, in fact, that's part of their specialty, is they help anchor Christ consciousness on our planet. And as I mentioned, they're coming forward more often, and they also, let's see, I've already mentioned that. They, when they come in, when they come forward, they're not only anchoring Christ consciousness on the planet, but they're bringing in more Christ light. And I often see them like in activations, they'll bring this into our pillars of light and strengthening that with that Christ light. So that's some of the ways that they've assisted. All right. These next ones are another interesting bunch. When I first met them, they just identified themselves as nature dragons. That's what they wanted to be called. and this was also very recently, September of this year, 2024, they appeared to me very small and light, and they really looked a lot like fairies when I saw them. So their wings were very fairy-like, kind of like this, or very tiny. Um, not quite their energy, not quite as playful and light as the fairies, but there was like the only way I could describe it is like some bounciness to their energy. It's like a bouncy energy, light energy. Um, and they said that they work with the fairies and the trees, blades of grass, nature, really their energy signature being very connected with nature so that they can help us connect with nature in our dimension. Um, their frequency can help us stay connected to the grounding energy of the nature around it, but they can also help us if we don't live in an area where there's a lot of nature. I know, sometimes in the concrete jungle, if you are not really, you don't have a lot of exposure to, trees, nature, they can help you sense that connection, even if you're not physically in that sort of environment. A key message that I shared here from them is that nature is a key component of staying in this elevated frequency that we want to be in our ascension. All right, they're quite cute. They're yellowish, but I something tells me they come in more than one color. Uh, the most I guess distinguishing factor is they look a lot like fairies, and their energy signature also being light. All right. The ethereal pink dragons of love. I also mentioned this earlier, um, earlier in the course, but I'm bringing them forward because of the signature that they carry being elevated. When I first met pink dragons, which I called pink dragons of love, they were a darker pink, like a richer pink, and then much later, maybe in 2020, yeah, in 2023, I met these other dragons. I call them the ethereal pink dragons of love. I used to call them the new pink dragons of love. But basically, they're also, they're of the same love, unconditional love frequency, but at a different part of the spectrum, where they're how they explained it is they're a faction of the larger collective of pink dragons, but they carry an elevated frequency of love that became available to humanity once our collective consciousness rose enough for that to come forward. So it's their signature is their energetic signature is on a different part of the spectrum of that love frequency. And this message here sort of just gives a little more information on why they say different. So I wanted to share that. And they are, when I did meet them, it was unexpected because I had only known the other Big Dragons of Love. But they also wanted to share that they offer their partnership at this time, should we want to work with them in spreading this elevated frequency of love. There is a longer message and an activation somewhere on my Instagram. If you, maybe I'll add it to your library if you want to access that. All right, the next one is the Sophia Dragon, like I have in my background. So many may be familiar with the Sophia Dragons, but actually I personally didn't meet one until just this past August. And it was also, again, during one of my programs. A lot happens in those programs, so um, you might get tired of hearing me mention that, but that's where many of them come forward. So they appeared to me as large, very white, opaque dragons. Um, just like the Christ consciousness dragons are large and opaque white, but they're so different. The Sophia dragons had pointy wings. They're like this, whereas the Christ consciousness dragons are more. They're just like unlike any other dragons I've seen. I can't even get AI to do it right for me. But their wings are like softer and scalloped at the edges, where the Sophia dragons are pointy, but also that same kind of opaque white. And they also are very high frequency, but they feel different than the Christ consciousness dragons. and they are connected to the angels, and they also come with, they are of the same frequency as the angels. They they said that their signature is to portray and illustrate the rising frequencies of the human collective consciousness. And when they came forward in my class, they shared a message. um, might have shared part of this in on my Instagram account as well, but here is a longer version of it, longer than what I had previously shared. So you can look at the deck to read that, if you choose to. But they encouraged and reminded us that we can spread this frequency just by emanating that, and we can start with those closest to us around us. All right, last group for now, because I'm sure I'm going to be meeting more dragons over time. And as always, I'll be adding to the course when more come forward. So these ones were etheric rainbow dragons, and the activation I'm going to be giving during the live workshop and at the end of this is from them, if that's still what wants to come forward. But anyway, these I also met in August during the same gathering where I met the Sophia dragons. These were small etheric rainbow dragons, and what they did is they worked on our pillars of light. In the journey, it was like they were connecting the different chakras in our body, our in-body chakra, well, our in-body chakras and the 5D chakras. They were working on connecting them so that as we received information from our higher chakras, they would seamlessly connect with the different chakras within us. And when they were doing this, it almost looked to me like they were working on a circuit board. That's what they showed me. But essentially, their signature, their specialty is to align our chakras so that when we receive the higher guidance, it's almost like the right areas, the appropriate areas within our system, our our energetic centers light up based on what we're receiving, what we're perceiving, and based on the information that uh, we need or are asking for. Um, and because of that, when they help us, it's really very individual, because what one person needs may be different from another person. So in my class, when they did that, it while they were showing me what was happening, the result and the transmission, the activation was very specific for each student in class. It's based on the calibration that that particular person needs. So something to keep in mind when you work with them. It'll be very tailored to you and what you need. All right. I am going to stop the recording here and add the activation separately in your library, um, so that you can access it separately, download it separately. But what also is dropping in is so I know that the rainbow dragons, these etheric rainbow dragons, want to do the activation for my live workshop. But what's coming through right now for this module in your library is the magma dragon. He wants to come forward with an activation for you. So I'm going to stop the recording and record that separately.